Thanks, Jenny. Welcome to the second installment in our series, The Comeback: Sports in a World Pandemic. Today's program is on facility development and redevelopment. We have a great lineup of speakers, and it figures to be another interesting and informative discussion. Again, thank you for attending, and with that, I'll turn things over to my co-chair, John Israel.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Kevin, and thank you all for joining us today. For those who don't know me, I'm John Israel, and with Kevin, I co-chair the Sports and Entertainment Group at Foley, which is a multidisciplinary group of attorneys that has a deep and broad experience in sports and entertainment. Several of us here are what we call industry insiders. We're lawyers who've spent some time as in-house counsel with sports organizations. I was with the NBA for nearly 8 years as an assistant general counsel, and Bob DuPay, who hosted the last program and will be on at the end of the day, was with MLB in significant roles for a number of years. So as outside lawyers, we bring a unique insider's perspective to the landscape, and we're excited about this series, The Comeback. The last year has been a difficult time. When the league shut down about a year ago, we did a series of Zoom calls with clients and friends across different industry categories, including venues, league and team counsel, esports, consumer products. At the time, there was really nothing happening, no games, no events, and no plans for them at all. Nothing to execute against. The frustration and worry were big, except for maybe the esports group. Honestly, they were pretty comfortable in the online world. And frankly, I think maybe the word COVID didn't come up in the first 30 minutes of what was a 2-hour, fairly lively discussion with them. But I found, across all calls, there was a spirit of how to make something out of nothing and be innovative and productive, even under the circumstances, which were pretty difficult at the time. So now here we are, more than a year later, and actually several months into the comeback. And today, as Kevin said, our focus is on future facility development and redevelopment in sports and entertainment, with an eye on the impact of the pandemic and COVID-related considerations. And so, will there be change as a result of all this? And I have to say, when all this started, I was somewhat skeptical. I thought as soon as this COVID thing clears with vaccines or some other way, that human nature will move us all quickly back to normal life, and we just can't resist it, and being at games is going to be a part of that. But maybe those assumptions I had were wrong. I mean, what if there is no clearing of the pandemic? It seems that even with the return to normal activities, we're going to have the virus here and variants, or maybe some other bug will come along. So and actually after last week, I'm starting to think maybe my initial view though was right, having seen 38,000 people pack Globe Life Field for the Texas Rangers home opener. So clearly there's a segment of the population that's ready to return without COVID-related concerns, and surely there are those that are not so willing and ready. But in thinking on all this, I started to think that COVID is really just a new subset of a larger question that has drawn intense industry focus for years: how to drive attendance at arenas and stadiums. We did a roundtable on this concept 3 years ago that was focused on selling the live in-game experience, and focus was on innovative technology and how facility designs could be key to drive the in-venue fan experience. And so there's always, been this serious attention paid to how fans are attending games and consuming games, and that's been magnified in recent years by increasing competition like streaming and HD TV and changing spectator habits. We see people at games multitasking with multi-screens while in their seats, and maybe there's generational shifts at play with social media and technology all playing roles. So it seems that there was already change afoot before COVID in terms of what was happening with venues. Things like contactless ticket entry and cashless transactions was all out there and coming, and maybe now it's just accelerated with COVID. So keeping fans interested and going to games has always been a big question, and now we wonder whether and how COVID will factor into the venue design question. Will new stadiums have fewer seats, more spacing? What about indoor air quality, HVAC, and airflow? Are there going to be changes? What about places where crowds congregate, bathrooms, entries, exits? Will there be more of these? Can facility design increase crowd flow and social distancing, things like that? And what about the social spaces? A lot of venues have been built with large club areas and suites. Is that good or bad for post-pandemic environments? There are lots of questions, and that's why we have our esteemed guests here today who spend their daily lives tackling these difficult questions. So we're looking forward to hearing from them on that front. As a program note, I just wanted to say that part 3 of our series, which is really 2B on venues, will come in May, and we're going to turn our attention to design and development over to everyday operations and the challenges of reopening buildings and the return of fans. And in that vein, I also wanted to give you a heads up. In the next week or so, we're going to be publishing what we call our nationwide COVID regulation tracker, a roadmap to restart for sports and entertainment venues in the U.S. It's going to be a compendium of state and local COVID-related regulations that impact the reopening and operation of sports and entertainment venues. It's going to cover all states and jurisdictions where there are professional teams located. It's going to include state and city specific details on venue capacity, ticketing policy, screening procedures, safety and mitigation requirements, and we'll have URL links to governmental regulations and even the rules established by the local team. So hopefully we'll get that in front of you in the next week and put at your fingertips in one place, your one-stop access to all COVID rules and regulations relating to sports and entertainment venues. But for now, let's get on to the program. I'm going to introduce our moderator, Rick Horo, who's a accomplished sports media author and media personality. Rick's the author of many books, including the Sports Business Handbook, Insights from 100+ Leaders Who Shaped the First 50 Years in the Industry, Beyond the Box Score, which he co-wrote with Carla Swatek, and When the Game is on the Line, all about sports deal making. So Rick, I'm going to turn it over to you. Let's get things started.
John, thank you very much. Kevin, thank you very much. And great to be with everybody, and Foley as well. Before, John, I let you go, I just wanted to commend everybody to go to your mailbox or whatever people do these days and wait breathlessly for the nationwide COVID regulation tracker. It will be a unique device. I've seen it being made, and it is something that includes everything you need to know from the 50 states as it relates to all sports, and it will evolve. This is a template that Foley will publish and continue to update, and will be, unfortunately, we're in a position of needing this kind of invaluable resource as we come back, and this is precisely that device. John, what's your, don't give it away, but what's your kind of one takeaway and trend from what this product will produce and what this product tells us?
Well, I guess I'd say, not surprisingly, looking at the broad landscape, there's a complete lack of uniformity that mostly matches maybe the political stratification surrounding COVID in the United States. I mean, there's some jurisdictions that have no rules that apply, Texas, for example, and there are other places that have significant capacity restrictions and requirements. And most everywhere, though, and we're seeing, and maybe this is just the nature of trying to even in jurisdictions where there may not be particular sets of rules, that most teams are developing programs and plans that take COVID into account, whether it's pod seating, cashless transactions, ticket language we've seen with healthcare promises, similar to the disclaimers that we see on standard ticket back language. So it looks like there's clearly a balancing act out there, attracting again, getting people to the stadiums, right, and arenas, including those that maybe are less fearful of COVID and those that continue to be worried about being in places where they might contract the virus.
And remember, last session on March 10, we talked about some of the major positives, if there were, about the comeback and the pandemic and the virus. One of them was the best practices sharing of information. This is a tangible manifestation of that sharing, feel free to take advantage of it and contact the people at Foley. This becomes hopefully the Bible for all facilities as they reopen over the next few years. John, thank you very much. Really appreciate your input and your vision.
Thanks so much. Enjoy the program, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, as the pandemic winds down, there'll be a series of significant attempts to include various forms of infrastructure assistance to the states and cities, as the initial Biden Build It Back Better initiative signals. As the issue attracts substantial public national attention, communities will be exploring opportunities for securing public assistance for facility development and modernization, transportation community development, mega event attraction, commercial development, residential opportunities, retail development, and the like. Through this year, cities, counties, and states will face a decision on how best to allocate the stimulus-related infrastructure funding that should be available. It's important to note that the definition of infrastructure has evolved over the years. Building the entire interstate highway system, by the way, which preoccupied the federal government for much of the 20th century, cost the U.S. only $500 billion in today's dollars. I say only, according to the 2016 report by the American Society of Civil Engineers. Over 30 different types of public facilities were funded in the 1930s during the New Deal era as WPA supported stimulus projects, including the Miami Orange Bowl. Yankee Stadium was built in the 1920s, partially in response to the 1917-1918 Spanish flu pandemic. And importantly, while sports and entertainment facilities may provide a highly visible illustration of infrastructure development, the national need exists for roads, bridges, community development projects, Wi-Fi, high-tech accessibility, and other critical public, civic, economic recovery projects. All of these projects have a number of benefits in common: economic impact, job creation, industrial relocation, increased quality of life, community stabilization. Infrastructure development and modernization has been the target of creative public-private partnership funding for years: opportunity zone funding, tax increment district creation, public awareness and promotional dollars, and the like. The interstate system, for example, produced $6 in economic gains for every dollar spent. Simultaneously, the design of the safest facility prototypes of the future will continue to dominate the landscape. All public gathering places will be measured by new medical and protocol standards, which will focus on new protective measures that will provide public benefits for years to come. Whether the facilities will receive GBAC star accreditation is secondary to the broader concept of developing a prototypical list of virus-related improvements. Even with the vaccine numbers going up, a Washington Post and University of Maryland poll conducted in late March found that only 42% of Americans would be comfortable attending an in-person sporting event, while 40% would not be comfortable and 18% were unsure. This means it's clear that the sports facility business needs to remain intently focused on the perception of safety. There'll be ongoing funding for this specific issue, by the way, and it certainly merits an important place in the overall discussion. And as new stadiums and arenas are developed, hopefully Tampa, Oakland, and definitely Seattle, Long Island for arenas, the focus on new protective measures from the ground up will be front and center. At present, Congress is estimating the national cost of the COVID pandemic at over $16 trillion. As we look at best practice templates that'll help guide us out of the pandemic, it's important to gain the perspective from teams, leagues, facility designers, architects, urban planners, and public officials. Gurus. We have 4 gurus today. We have a political guru, Greg Ballard, the former mayor of Indianapolis. We'll get to him in a minute. We have a architectural facility guru, Brian Truby, the principal of HKS Architects, developing different kinds of facilities all over the world. A design guru, Janet Marie Smith, LA, Baltimore, Boston, Worcester, and otherwise. And we have Frank Sapovitz, the event guru, Super Bowls, NFL, and other things that he is known best for. So without further ado, let me get into some of the conversations with some of our guests. And the lead off, Greg Ballard. Greg, a good friend, but he also was the 48th mayor of the city of Indianapolis, almost reelected by popular acclaim unanimously. We'll let him talk about that. But he served 23 years in the United States Marine Corps before becoming the city's 48th mayor. And very uniquely, he was founder and chair of the Mayor's Professional Sports Alliance for the United States Conference of Mayors. That's how I got to know him. He certainly can be viewed as one of the world's best practical political experts on public-private partnerships and infrastructure development. How is that for an intro, Greg?
Wow, that was pretty long, and I hope it's all accurate at some point. So,
well, you know it's all accurate because I was saying it, and we've worked on that one together for years. Sure. You're a hometown native of Indianapolis. You served 23 years in the Marine Corps, as we said, before becoming the city's mayor. What was your vision of Indianapolis when you took office, and how did you think you could go about accomplishing it?
Yeah, that's a great question, and what should every mayor be focused on? And for me, it was about attracting talent into the city, and that, how do you do that? What does that look like? Really matters quite a bit because of the way businesses look to move to certain areas, and you want to get your employment rate up as high as possible, increase the tax base as much as possible. So creating that infrastructure, if you will, creating the vibe in the city was really important to me, and that included so many things, including a really strong cultural and arts scene, if at all possible, a foodie scene now, certainly what I call mobility options with the bicycle culture and transit and that sort of thing. Part of that obviously was sports, and Indianapolis has had a big sports development in the last 40 to 50 years, and the infrastructure has been built up around that too. And I think, as most people know, and Frank Sapovitz, who's on this call also, was a great partner with Indianapolis when he was with the NFL during our Super Bowl, and you could see that the infrastructure that had been put into place, we did some of it, a lot of it was prior to me, it really paid off, and I think we saw that being paid off in the last month also with the NCAA tournament, all of it being held in Indianapolis.
Well, and you were a protector of an asset, and mayors bid for things. Seen the U.S. Conference of Mayors Sports Committee work, and you guys like each other, but boy, if there was an event out there, it's like red meat, and you should be, because it's economic development as well. You noted in your contribution to our sport business handbook that was very thoughtful, I would say, that, quote, you capitalized on the city's greatest strength, smart, friendly, hardworking, civic-minded people who worked for the greater good. That's why we were successful. And that's one of the reasons, obviously, political leadership also, but reflect on that strategy of using sports events as economic development, specifically to set Indianapolis apart.
Yeah, it was very purposeful. And like I say, it started 45 years ago with several people getting together and say, we need to promote Indianapolis, and how should we do that? And we came up with the amateur sports strategy. And we did go after events. As you noted, the city should be doing that sort of thing. It really does help. And we had the National Sports Festival in 1982 when that was still part of the sports scene. And then we got the Pan Am Games in 1987. And I would suggest that is really the event that gave the city a lot of confidence that, hey, we can do this. We are really good at this sort of thing, and we can be a player. And then we moved on from there, going after sports governing bodies, obviously the NCAA, going after more events. We created the Indiana Sports Commission in '79, Indiana Sports Corp in '79, which is really the first sports commission in the country, and it's still one of the strongest, obviously. And you saw that being played out again with the March Madness here recently, where they played such a big part. But this was all purposeful. This was not happenstance at all, and it was very, very structured. We built the facilities to make sure we got it. We got a great natatorium downtown, which is famous for being very fast. The Velodrome. Obviously, the football stadiums. The gutsiest move I ever saw a mayor make anywhere was Bill Hudnut, back when he was the mayor in the 1980s, building a stadium, a football stadium with no team. And then we were lucky enough to get the Colts the next year, but that was a pretty gutsy move on his part to do that. But that was, again, part of the strategy to attract sports, to promote the name of Indianapolis and promote economic development in the area.
Well, gutsy turns into disaster if things don't work out. They
Sure.
turn into be visionary if they do, and you've been on the visionary side for the longest time. And you probably, maybe Oklahoma City, maybe a couple others, one of the only communities that have used sports directly as a primary tool of economic development. But then you turn to a lot of your sites to best practices nationally. As the founding chair of the Mayor's Professional Sports Alliance for the United States Conference of Mayors, lucky enough to work with you on that group for a long time. And we said that cities compete for sports entertainment events like they do other assets. You, though, attempted to foster cooperation in the context of economic development, generational legacy, and community development, things that all communities ought to have in common when they try to get infrastructure done. Talk about that for a minute. Explain it.
Yeah, a large part of what I was trying to do there was to give the mayors and the cities information, because all the cities across the nation that had professional sports in their cities were kind of on their own. There was no information being shared. What was the best practices, which is a term I think is what we're really trying to do, to make sure that everybody knew where the standard was, what the leagues were trying to do, what teams were trying to do. I think we fostered, along with your help, fostered a great relationship with the leagues. But initially, I think they were a little like, oh, what's going on here? And I understand that completely. But it really was important that cities got together and shared what they were doing, what the deals were with stadiums and with teams and that sort of thing. And with the help of NYU, as you know, that sports group up there, the Lee Iger, they were crucial in making sure that we had put information together in such a way that cities could look at it and say, okay, this is what Indianapolis did, and this is what Kansas City did, and this is what's happening with this particular sport and with this particular league and with my particular team. And that had not been done before. And I think that was great that we were able to get that done, again, with your help and a few others, to be able to do that. And it's still going today. I think Buddy Dyer heads that up right now from Orlando, and I think it's important that continued.
Well, and then I guess finally, in you know, the message relative to infrastructure, and this is probably best served not as a political Republican or Democratic issue, and we've talked about creating some kind of a structure with former mayors who can talk in an apolitical way about what these facilities have done for their communities. But as the U.S. looks back to the worst pandemic in 100 years, maybe the worst pandemic ever, how can we use public-private partnership, economic development, and infrastructure development, broadly defined, as a device to hasten the comeback?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I've always been, I believe in public-private partnerships. I really think they're important, because I think they maximize the use of the government asset, whether it be a building, whether it be a velodrome, whether it be money, whether it be personnel. And my point is, let's maximize the use of that. And sometimes that partnership is what takes it over the top to make it most valuable for everybody. And the other part of that is when the government is involved, whether it be a city or a state or sometimes the country, when the political leadership is involved, the civic leadership is involved, then everybody feels more comfortable with it. I got asked many times on many different subjects, are you behind this? Do you support this? Because they did not want to invest in it. They did not want to go down in that direction unless the city government was there. So the public-private partnership is really important to kind of send signals that this is good for the city and this is what we're trying to do, whether that be, whether in cultural arts or building a stadium or, building out that sort of infrastructure that creates the type of city that people want to live in. And that's really, really important. I love public-private partnerships. I did a lot of them when I was the mayor, and I hope that cities understand the benefit of them.
Mayor, thank you very much for your vision and always your strategic insight and leadership. And I will see you next week. Without giving it away, bring your A game.
I will. Thanks, Greg.
Brian Truby, a principal with the global design firm HKS. He's responsible for all sport and entertainment projects, a member of the firm's executive committee, recognized as one of the 20 most influential people in sport facility design, work with many of the giants of the sport, the Cowboys, the Colts, the Vikings, SoFi Stadium, Globe Life. Now, we'll talk about that in his presentation. Brian is a good friend and a visionary in the industry. Are you there? Hey, you okay? Where are you?
I'm here.
Thank God. How are you, Brian Truby? Wonderful to have you with us. And Brian has been really busy recently. He's always been associated with iconic industry-defining buildings, such as buildings for the Cowboys, the Colts, the Vikings, and now the Rams and the Chargers, which will host the Super Bowl next year. What was your secret? You know, you said in the Sport Business Handbook you contributed in that for the development of the new generation of new multi-purpose facilities that has inspired the next wave of design innovations, you've got to reinvent and improve the building type on a regular basis. What do you mean by that, and why does that separate you from the rest?
Well, let me just do a little bit of housekeeping. I'm having about a 15-second delay from what I'm seeing on the slides you got there, so apologies for not having the right slides for the comments, but been through this before, so technology works some days and it doesn't others. Rick, to answer your question, the one thing we've always been focused on is what we call a serious architectural expression. And all the communities that we work in, if you want to advance the slide, the communities that we work in, we create an understanding that what we're after is doing something that's relevant to the place, the time, and the culture that we're building in. And so these, 4 venues that you see here, Colts, Cowboys, Vikings, and SoFi, all radically different, but very high quality buildings. And they need to be progressive. In other words, every building needs to be better than the last. And, the second thing we really focus on is that they need to be innovative. They need to have things in them that haven't been done before. And one of the key things that we've done for quite some time, you can advance the slides again, is to really focus on making these buildings multi-purpose in a good way, rather than multi-purpose in a way that was happening in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even the 90s, unfortunately. And so these places become hosts to worldwide events, and they create attention for the communities that they're built in and become symbolic and iconic for the communities that they're built in. And so these images that you see of Indianapolis and AT&T, as we're walking through them here, these buildings are unique in the fact that in Indianapolis, we designed for the NCAA as an equal tenant to the NFL, the Colts. And so, helping the NCAA see they could do these center court 72,000 seat configurations for the first time for men's Final Four was a game changer for them. And that goes to our passion to make our buildings significantly more profitable than our competitors. And then, of course, when you see AT&T, we ramped that up significantly, working with the Cowboys and the Joneses to create what we wanted to be at that time, and has since been proven that as really one of the most important entertainment venues in the world, and hosting all kinds of events up to and including crazy things you'd never thought would be in a stadium, like the Country Music Awards and All-Star games. And so that's really been an important part of what we're focused on in our practice.
Brian, you also wrote that the process of delivering a monumental building can span many years, from initial planning to opening day. I think you designed the Acropolis or Parthenon as well, and it took about 1,000 years for that. But in all seriousness, staying focused throughout that period requires a perspective that comes from deep commitment and passion for what each building represents, you wrote. Has the pandemic inspired specific changes in design and concept for new or renovated buildings?
Well, first off, the time period to get these projects done is unprecedented. There's not many buildings and projects it can take 10 years, really from beginning of the vision to opening. And so our practice has really been shaped around that. And one of the things that we focus on, to answer the first part of your question, is the real estate and optimizing and monetizing the surrounding real estate. So this image of the Vikings, the kind of aerial view of downtown Minneapolis, our focus and what we started saying when we were working on that project was, for $1 billion stadium, you should get $4 to $6 billion in real economic real estate uplift in the immediate area. And we're over $4 billion now, 4 years later, after opening that building. And so our focus on the real estate is something that you'll see is a very important part of our practice. The other thing that I think is really important about HKS that's radically different and pointed and specifically and strategically at the situation that we're in right now is, not only are we a leader in the hospitality industry, working for all the most prestigious brands, but we're also the lead provider to the healthcare industry. And so that has really taught us how to design things that have a very high quality look, high quality feel, which is the reason our buildings are known for having the finest fan experience on all levels, but also allows us to understand how to create environments that are easy to clean, how to treat them appropriate mechanically. These are some of our most, I think, important learnings from being in the healthcare industry for 45 years. And so the combination of those things gives us a real powerful way to address the very real issues that we're dealing with in our industry right now around opening our venues. And somebody's already mentioned the 38,000 that showed up at Globe Life Field, and I was one of those 38,000 for that event and enjoyed it thoroughly.
Yeah, and frankly, you had a very unique distinction on this because you've been a mouthpiece, spokesperson in the industry as the industry has emphasized the safe stadium of the future, and as a critical role of the return of fans, specifically in sports in general. We talked about the 42%, and the key, of course, is to bring it up to some bigger number. What are some of the major focuses in this area, specifically about making stadiums safer?
Well, as we scroll through these slides, you'll see SoFi and Globe Life Field. And those two projects continue our real focus on doing two things: providing more space per person than previous venues. We started this kind of thinking with AT&T. AT&T is around 3 million square feet. At the time we completed AT&T, the largest NFL venue was in Houston, and it was about 2.1 million square feet. This translates to two very important things. Number one, it allows you to have the space to create the preeminent fan experience, and it allows you to have the back of house space to produce and host all the very unusual additional entertainment events. And more importantly, it allows you to invent events. And as you look through SoFi, the thing that we did there that was so progressive to even our portfolio was really putting 3 venues under one large open air, but protected from rain and the elements, clear roof. And so these images that are being scrolled through that show the concourses, the kind of space in the concourses is very important to be able to make people feel comfortable coming back to events and not being crowded through 3 or 4 different entries, but having access to the venue through multiple entries, and really allows us to, I think, from a continuous standpoint, host these events, all kinds of events, in a way that make people feel safe and actually make them safer in our new world that we're all entering into now.
Brian, really appreciate it. I think your 15-second behind was seamless, and I think you've got your slide presentation done. We look forward to you being a continued visionary in the industry. Why don't you walk quickly, as I see the slides catching up, through Globe Life for a minute with us and talk as you did about, or about the sellout that, happened on opening day and how you thought it came off?
Well, I think one of the important things about that building, and we scrolled by some cross sections through SoFi too, is one of the things we've done in our venues is separate the concourses into not a single main concourse, but multiple concourses. So when you segment the population, you instantly do something that creates what feels like a more intimate environment. But what it also does is allow you to provide more space for people to access all the things that fans say enhance the experience of being in our venues. And Globe Life Field does all those things. There's actually 3 concourses that make up what people think are the main concourse. There's 2 below that that accommodate the lower bowl, and the main concourse becomes basically a street, the public realm for the project. And these other larger views inside the venue show what it feels like with the roof open and with the roof closed. Those kinds of things, in fact, make people feel and make them safer in these kinds of environments too. You can feel the breeze in this venue like we all did for opening day, and that's one of those things that makes it feel like a truly outdoor ballpark, which is really one of our primary goals. You can see even with the roof closed on a couple of the images how much light is coming through the roof and the sidewalls. And then of course the big arched concourse on the upper concourse. Our upper concourse goes all the way around, and you can see the amount of space there. So besides being the only upper concourse to go all the way around the venue, it also provides a lot of space and some really phenomenal views of the game itself.
I will say parenthetically that there were a lot of issues that we will raise subsequently, and as we continue to come back. The English Premier League has just expressed support for, and the Buffalo Braves and Buffalo Bills and Sabres have all talked about passport COVID zones and not. And a lot of discussions about that will be triggered by where you can physically separate people. So you will be at a cutting edge of the future, and glad to count you as a visionary and a friend. Brian Truby, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Rick.
Janet Marie Smith is a renowned architect and urban planner. She's also the LA Dodgers Executive Vice President of Planning and Urban Development. But clearly before that, she's best known in the baseball world for her work on influential Oriole Park at Camden Yards, and then saving Fenway Park and renovations for Dodger Stadium, Oriole Park and Camden Yards, with the guy who is going to be one of the stars of the show on May 12, Larry Lucchino, fresh off the opening of Polar Park in Worcester the day before. So a seamless tease. Everybody who's on today is guaranteed a seat for the May 12 event, so you need to be there for that. But Janet Marie Smith is so much more. She's been involved with the Atlanta Braves, the Hawks, the Thrashers before that. She's the Edmund T.P. Bass Visiting Professor at Yale University School of Architecture in 2017, and on and on. Before we ask Janet Marie to make some comments, as everybody else did, let's watch a quick video on Dodger Stadium, the 3rd largest ballpark in baseball, as one of the premier venues in all sports. The project was a $100 million renovation of center field and completed new circulation around Dodger Stadium, completed for the 2020 season, and the focal point of the MLB All-Star Game, slated to be held in LA in 2022.
Welcome to Dodger Stadium, which is not just the most beautiful place ever built to play or watch the game of baseball. You will get to see most everything here today. Fans won't be able to see that just yet, but we're hoping sometime between May 1 and June 15, according to the governor, we should be open 100%. That's the day we're all looking for, and you will see why we are so excited for that day to happen.
over the years that Guggenheim Partnership has owned the club since 2012, we've added a footprint of almost 4 acres to the perimeter of Dodger Stadium, the most significant addition being where you are today, which is the 2.5-acre center field plaza and front door.
You can access the whole stadium 360 degrees with bridges and with elevators and with escalators. And a lot of these things are history displays and art displays. And that's why we call this not just a great place to play and watch the game of baseball, but it's a fun place to walk around. Activities everywhere, art exhibits everywhere, history exhibits everywhere.
The Dodgers are probably one of the most storied sports franchises in the world, and so we are pleased that we've had the opportunity to put memorabilia out throughout the ballpark. Maybe some of the most significant this year are things that the Lasorda family has loaned to us that are on display in the 1962 lockers that are in the right field pavilion.
And again, as we said on day one, if you're sitting in the bowl, you won't notice really anything different. It'll be as comfortable and familiar as it has been for 60 years. With one exception, you will see the home run seats, which might be the coolest part of the redesign here, and you'll get to experience those yourself. I'm particularly fond of the boardwalk, the concourse that is now behind the pavilions, which is one long drink rail from foul pole to foul pole. Just great, unbelievable standing room.
We've also added a lot of things for families here. You'll see that there are 3 distinct kids areas in center field, that it's just casual play equipment. We want to make certain that not only is there a place for families to come and for young kids to sort of get their jitters out and enjoy being at Dodger Stadium, but that we send a clear message that this is a family-friendly place, and the kind of atmosphere that we want here is one that is for all generations to enjoy. We also have batting and pitching cages. We have a virtual dugout photo that we'll have on display today so that you can see a really high-tech way of having some entertainment and fun here at Dodger Stadium.
Dodger Stadium is a great stadium, but it's never going to be a new stadium. And yet we had to add 21st century amenities to it. And to do that while keeping the architectural integrity, what we loved about the look, making sure we kept those bleachers, those palm trees, those San Gabriel Mountains, that vista, making sure that never changed while doing all this. That was a tremendous achievement by the design people and the construction people, all of which was, again, headed up by Janet.
Janet, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Rick.
Really, really appreciate your insight. You look at that, and Dodger Stadium still has the best hot dogs in the business. And you really, really kept the character of the ballpark down to the last hot dog. Your success.
Have that Dr. Dog any day.
Yeah, really, exactly. One of the many unique features of Dodger Stadium. Your success in Baltimore basically spawned over 20 MLB parks to move into urban centers and created a new formula for fan-friendly areas in sports venues, and also establishing new thinking on how sports fits into cities and elevate design. Camden Yards, Fenway Park, Dodger Stadium, the new ballpark in Worcester that we'll see next month. Sports facilities have been the catalyst for major community, commercial, and residential development surrounding those facilities. Are there any overall guiding principles that define these projects from your perspective?
Well, I think just to rewind the tape and echo some of the things that you heard about Indianapolis, when Baltimore former mayor, then Governor William Donald Schaefer, selected the site we now know as Camden Yards for the baseball park, it was with a clear idea that to reinvent downtown in a new age where the financial center was no longer the hub, you needed attractions that made people, no matter where they lived, think of it as a city square, think of it as their community. And so Baltimore is well known in urban planning annuals for the waterfront promenade, putting a convention center downtown early, the aquarium, the science center, and the idea of putting a baseball park downtown was just part of that formula. And how lucky that the stars aligned that the Orioles president, Larry Lucchino, had this inspiration for building a baseball-only intimate ballpark that wasn't trying to be everything to all people, but was really trying to create an atmosphere for baseball that harkened back to the earlier era, more relaxed era of baseball that you saw at Ebbets, Fenway, Wrigley. It was no accident that the smallest venues in baseball were drawing the highest crowds. And so in Larry's mind, there was something to be said about the venue as an attraction for baseball. So it is a different sport than basketball, hockey, football, for sure. But I think in the years that I've had a chance to work for Larry on other projects, the renovation of Fenway and the creation of Polo Park in Worcester, and of course I worked for Stan Kasten, the president of the Dodgers, twice now also in both Atlanta and Los Angeles. I think what we've tried to celebrate is this idea of creating something that is really part of the city, that draws people from all economic, ethnic, educational levels, that really makes baseball feel like America's pastime.
Well, clearly public-private partnerships it's an overused term unless you're using it and doing it the right way. Infrastructure partnerships that are catalysts, and as they continue to proliferate, how do communities maximize their return on respective public investment and create these opportunities for residential, commercial developments that you have inspired in all of these facilities that you've touched?
Well, I think it is an overused term, and so it's important to dissect what it means. I think there's one extreme where the public sector is largely providing the funding sources to make something happen, and the private entity's contribution is running that resource and providing the team and providing the operational capital to make it come alive. And that is clearly a value, and that is a strong partnership for sure. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there are those buildings like Fenway and Dodger Stadium that are privately owned, but the public sector role can't be minimized by the fact that it is all private money, because without the public sector's support for those projects and how they might be changed, which don't fit neatly into regular zoning regulations, the kinds of changes that we've made to those buildings to keep them alive and to make them meaningful to the city really require foresight on the public sector's part. And that can be anything from an obvious example, the Green Monster seats in Boston are built in the air rights over Lansdowne Street. Maybe a little less sexy, but equally as important in order to create a wider concourse at Fenway Park underneath the outfield bleachers. We were able to decommission an alley and grow into the adjacent building. Dodger Stadium, it doesn't have physical adjacencies that require those kinds of things, but goodness knows the $200 million plus projects that Stan Kasten has overseen in the last few years at Dodger Stadium could not have happened in that short off-season window of 5 months without the city's building departments, inspectors, and their willingness to really put a laser focus on helping us work in such a compressed time frame. So it's a long way of saying that the public sector is enormously important. The Worcester project, which you will hear about from Larry next month, I think is just a wonderful example of a city looking at a 50-acre parcel in the center of its city that has been vacant now for half a century, and saying, look, how do this gulf in our community is not acceptable, and we could chip away at it over the next half a century and still not come up with enough development to fill it up. And the baseball park sitting there not only sort of is this instant firecracker that ignites development around it, but feeds the organically grown canal district and theater district on either side, and the city of Worcester has put together a formula where the revenue from the private development will, in essence, retire the bonds for the contribution that they have put into the creation of Polo Park, the home of the AAA Red Sox. So they run the gamut, as I know you well know, and it's been my pleasure to work on so many different variations of that formula.
Yeah, and do it better than anybody. So let's look forward for a minute. How did the post-pandemic facility modernization, planning, and development change from the way these projects were done just a few years ago? And clearly, after Dodger Stadium renovation, does the pandemic alter your assessment of that project? Are there things that you might have done differently?
You know, I honestly don't think so, Rick, and that's not just being defensive about it, but something that Brian said a moment ago really resonates with our view of things, that as we've done the renovations at Dodger Stadium and as we've created Polar Park in Worcester, we've thought about the fact that no longer do fans want to spend 9 innings with their fanny in their seat and focused on every pitch, but there's a lot of mobility within a ballpark, a lot of desire to move around, not only for the amenities of food, beverage, retail, entertainment offerings, but just to take in the game from different perspectives. And as we've created spaces to do that, it prepares us well to respond to the pandemic. And I think at the moment, that's mostly what we're trying to do, is respond to the pandemic. Brian noted these are projects that are years in the making, so it's hard to pivot on a dime and say, well, COVID's here now, so how do we change things? But I think there's also a thread of optimism through this, that COVID is something that we can conquer, and that our job today is to manage creating a safe environment for those who are comfortable coming out, and making certain that we do so in a responsible way is easier as a result of the added space.
Janet Marie, thank you very much for your perspective and vision. These facilities are legacies, not only today, but far into the future. Really appreciate you spending some time with us.
Thanks for having me. I've learned a lot too, so thank you.
We'll learn even more. Frank Zapovitz, Senior Vice President of Events for the National Football League from 2005 until 14. He saw the meteoric growth of the NFL Showcase event, the Super Bowl, and the NFL Draft. More than 25 years, he led some of the world's most prestigious sporting events, Group VP of Events and Entertainment for the NHL, 92 through 2005, the NHL Outdoor Game in 2003 when nobody knew what it was. But now he's got fast traffic entertainment, events entertainment that he runs with offices in New York, Sydney, and serving clients that have included the Indy 500, the National Rugby League, and he's authored 3 books and appeared in a cameo, by the way, as himself in Ivan Reitman's 2014 film, Draft Day. Frank Zapovitz, I don't know what you would have played if Ivan Reitman said you had to play somebody else in Draft Day. What do you think?
I was going to play you.
I don't think that's possible. Frank is on assignment today, and he obviously made the time for this. Really appreciate it. You've had the unique experience of implementing Super Bowls, the Stanley Cup, all of the things we talked about. What do all these events have in common relative to economic impact, community, quality of life, and the like?
You know, I'll start, Rick, thank you for having me on. I'll start with quality of life just to start with. If there's something that this world needs right now more than feeling that it's safe to return to live events at our venues, I can't think of it. Because live events are a social experience that we use to escape from the cares and pressures of our lives. They're cares and pressures for us, for everybody else. It's what makes our life worth living, in my opinion. They're a bonding experience for us with the sport and the fans around us. And, you know, that's why watching the games and events on television, which are magnificently well-crafted media experiences, they're better than nothing, no question. They don't really complete us as people or as fans. And you know, on the broadcast, seeing a sea of empty seats doesn't fulfill us emotionally. Broadcasters even added crowd noise, and you know, teams added cutouts, so we know all about that. So from a quality of life perspective, something's missing. Something has been missing from our lives for a year when we were unable to gather for sports events. Doesn't matter what the sport was, doesn't matter what the event was. Not being able to participate in those things left a hole. Now, when it comes to big tentpole events like the ones you listed, they do come with significant economic impact, and Mayor Ballard enumerated many of the reasons why cities pursue these things. And I know that there's great controversy over what impact there really is in real dollars and what it really means, but it's what I know for sure. These events eat up hotel rooms, put people in restaurants, put people in cabs, in Ubers and rental cars. They bring money to pay for those things, the entertainment, merchandise, and more. The purchases generate sales taxes, hotel taxes, tourism levies, all those pesky hotel taxes that, we have no idea what they really mean. And they utilize venues, and people get paid to work on the main events and the hospitality and entertainment events. Those people pay income taxes that flow from their wages. That's why, from my understanding, that cities pursue these things. And lastly, and we've been talking about it throughout this presentation, they showcase new venues, especially the mixed-use projects that are increasingly being developed by Brian Truby and his colleagues around the real estate development business. These are great marketing opportunities for cities, for new venues, and one great event begets another great event. So, the reduction or absence of meaningful economic impact, no question, was devastating to the communities that we work in and to the people in the businesses.
Well, we'll talk about the devastation and turn it on its head, because we have a whole comeback theme here. We've gone through an unprecedented 13 months, maybe longer, regarding something that we've never seen before. Cancellation and postponement of events all over the world. You've been involved in all of that. What have we learned that'll help us come back stronger?
There's a number of things. I mean, it really comes down to the fact that our fans make sports more relevant. The one thing that I learned that was really surprising to me, that notwithstanding the low ratings of the Masters this past weekend, having fans back in the stands generates interest in the market and generates interest in, on the broadcasts too. I live in New York, and the Yes Network just had the best opening week in terms of viewership in 9 years, and SNY had the best ever since the network was founded in 2006. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that fans are welcome to some degree, to some level, back in our stadiums. The other is to be better prepared for the unforeseen but the imaginable. Safety and security have been at the top of our minds since 9/11, really before 9/11, right? And now we can add health and safety to the list, and we've heard that from various presenters today. We need to operate healthy venues and healthy events. And cleanliness and sanitation are no longer really nice to have. The cleaner we keep our buildings, the more people will feel we're looking out for them, that we're looking out for their safety and safety, health. And I'm not sure that fever screenings are a bad idea to keep as part of the entrance checkpoint protocols. If you're fighting a sickness, whether it's COVID, flu, anything contagious, it might now be a good idea to have you not infect other fans. So I think that we can learn that this solution that we're applying to COVID right now may actually be beneficial to us in the new venue environment. We may be able to ditch the PPE, but we'll keep touchless technology and digital enhancements and some of the new physical infrastructure. But remember, something like this can happen again, and it may well. Whether it's a new variant that pops up that frustrates vaccines or some other crisis that emerges that has nothing to do with COVID, but might close our facilities for some period and make it tough for us to get to work and welcome people to our places of work. We'll be better prepared for that because of what we just experienced. The comforting thing from Frank Zapovitz is that he does not predict mandatory hazmat suits for any of the 60,000 people that will be attending in the future. So that's a good thing. Let me combine the next couple questions, because I think it's part of the same answer, and use the Indy 500 that's upcoming as a guide, since you're directly involved in that. That's coming up in about 4 weeks.
You obviously are dealing with a large and ever-changing number of contingency plans relative to attendance and otherwise. How do you deal with that directly, and how do you deal with the local, state, federal, league, business, political protocols that may come up at a moment's notice? You say you got to be flexible, but this pushes the boundaries of any case study anywhere, don't you think?
Well, yeah, clearly it does. And you know, I would say safety is the number one concern, no matter what it is. So the local health protocols, it's not an argument. It's you tell us what we can do, and that's what we're going to do. The upcoming Indy 500, well, Indianapolis Motor Speedway, sees 300,000 people or so on a normal year. And we're not sure how many fans will still be able to be accommodated on May 30th. But race day is a unique animal, as Greg Ballard will attest. The gates open at 6 in the morning. We have a pre-race show that's going full steam by 8 o'clock, and the green flag doesn't wave until 12:45. Nearly 5 hours later. Now, fans are not in their seats the entire time, just as our last speaker talked about in terms of how the new stadium might look. They're moving around the infield of a massive 2.5-mile oval. So they're experiencing entertainment, food and beverage, live on video screens, trackside traditions like the March to the Bricks that was introduced in 2016. So pregame parade of the Borg Warner Trophy through the infield. Now, we usually bring those things to the fans, and they generate crowds. So the question is, can we continue to do that, or do we have to start thinking about some of these traditions in a new way and relocate them, if you will, so that people can experience them on the video screens around the venue, but we're not generating crowds on the infield. So that's, one of the things that we're dealing with right now. In terms of how we're dealing, or how we would ever deal with, the local state and federal and city protocols and politics, perhaps, and business decisions, events like a lot of the sports business are dependent on strong, reliable partnerships. And those partnerships are based on each party understanding the wants and needs of the other. And that's not always obvious. I generally come right out and ask officials what their goals are for their city when a big tentpole event comes in. And then I try to help them achieve those things by what kinds of venues we select and what kinds of events we put in those venues. And I hope they do the same for us when we talk about what our needs are as event organizers, which I think it's fair enough to just share each other's aspirations for what these things can do. And as I mentioned, when it comes to the health protocol, we're going to do what is right, proper, and guided by our host venues and our host municipalities.
I've got one more put you on the spot question. Let's project ahead 3 years from now. That way we can't get into any, will there be vaccines for everybody, and will the pandemic be around? At least we hope not. Project ahead. Will we return to full capacity? What will capacity mean by then? How different will stadiums look? What is the process going to be as far as attending events and facilities 3 years from now?
I think, again, Rick, the notion of health and safety being foremost in our minds, along with safety and security, is something that's going to be with us for a very long time. Now, I am not yet able to predict the future. I'm working on it. But what I will say is that I'm actually very bullish on the notion that we're going to fill our buildings again. And it won't be this year, and it won't be next year, but it will be in a couple of 3 years, I really do believe. Nationally, there will be more demand, there'll be more comfort with the environment, there'll be more fans feeling better about returning. Right now, it's less than half of the fan base, as you said, but here's why I'm confident about that. The Spanish flu in 1918, 1919 devastated the United States. 675,000 Americans perished from that disease. 1920, 21, 22, that was the golden age of sports. By then, Major League Baseball was setting new attendance records that had not been seen before. Boxing, which was, one of the top 3 sports at the time, saw opportunities so great in the 1920s that new venues had to be built, sometimes temporary ones on farmland, believe it or not, to meet the demand. So sports attendance is part of what made the Roaring 20s roar. And I believe another Roaring 20s are in front of us.
That's a great way to end this perspective. And I know you're trying to predict the future. If you end up successfully doing it, call me and I'll fire my real estate agent, my stockbroker, and the guy that's going to tell me what to do with my Bitcoin. Frank, thank you very, very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Listen, everybody, thank you for spending time with us. It is important to put all of this in perspective. The International Association of Event Hosts came up with a survey of their 24 members in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and Middle East and North America recently. They found out that operational certainty is rising across the board. 76% of the members planning for stadium events attended by fans, 17%, only 17%, have canceled or postponed events in 2022, and the event industry support has become effectively higher all across the world. So the comeback is not just metaphorical, it is absolutely real. And to that end, we'd like to thank Brian Truby and Greg Ballard and Frank Sipovitz and Janet Marie Smith for lending their expertise and their considerable talents and vision to this. Rest assured that we're hoping that all of the events on the second Wednesday of each month subsequent to this will be as packed with great speakers as we just had. The opening of the Polar Park in Worcester will highlight the day before our next one, but we'll all consider issues relative to venue operation and event planning and the like. And thank you all very much for the speakers. And now my co-host and partner and mentor, Bob Dupay.
Thank you all very much for attending on behalf of all of us at Foley. A special thanks to Rick and all the panel members for this extraordinarily interesting look at current and future facilities, and with a special cameo by our friend Stan Kasten. Please come and join us. I agree with Frank entirely that the lifeblood of sports is live attendance, and so come join us on May 12th, where we're going to continue the discussion of facilities in terms of what changes and modifications are going to be made with regard to entrance, with regard to concessions, with regard to restrooms, and how the fan will have a comfortable experience. And so again, on behalf of all of us, thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you next month.